so I truly need not have worried that there wouldn't be enough questions. We definitely have too many to get through. And I'm just gonna check if our online people sent some as well. Let me give Lily a chance. Okay. So I'm gonna start with well, I don't know that it's necessarily an easier one. This question is, how do you decide what to speak about each week? So I will share with you that over the summer, I create an overarching calendar for the whole year from September through June. And each month has a theme, whether you know it or not. I know that it has a theme. And so then each one of the Sundays has a tentative title that pertains to that theme. In that calendar document, which some folks have access to if they're a Sunday service associate or if they work tech or if they're on the board, there are holidays lined up. There are sort of national days of importance. Month-long things like Black History Month are listed in there so that we can make sure that we're touching on important days in the life of our nation, in the life of our faith, in the life of other faiths. And then honestly, week to week, whatever I've put in there as the frame gets fleshed out with whatever is actually sort of happening in our world or in our congregation, or if I've seen something that has been inspiring to me, a poem or an article, and then it kind of evolves closer to the day into something like real and substantial and hopefully meaningful. And I do that in part, I have colleagues who will write earlier and I write on the later side. And in part that's because I don't ever want to come here on a Sunday morning and say something that doesn't take into account what's really happening in the world, right? So that's our first question. Thanks, Sarah. Okay, we have a question. How do I lovingly restart old and new habits? Starting again from zero is hard and discouraging. I keep comparing myself to past me. So that's a really big one. I have to confess, I also struggle with this a little bit, where I will think, oh man, I used to knit all the time and I haven't picked up my needles and isn't that terrible and aren't I being lazy? And I think that one of the ways, one of the things that we are called to do is to offer ourselves a little bit more grace. It sounds maybe like I'm going in a little bit of a different direction here, but I think that part of what's at the heart of this struggle is the impulse to be productive or the impulse to be to not change or not grow, right? That like there's sort of an idea in our culture that we should be able to sustain across a life all the best things that we ever start to do. And the reality is, in some years, you're not going to have time to knit. And in some years, going to the gym is just not going to happen. And that's actually not a moral failing, right? That's just life being what life is. So I think for this and questions like it, we're not so good at giving ourselves compassion, and that perhaps just letting yourself be in the place that you need to be in a given moment in your life is okay. And that would be my encouragement to me and to any of you who are struggling with this particular piece is grace and less focus on productivity. Next question. This one, the heart of this question is, why do people behave differently from what they claim to believe? So I'm guessing we've all met someone who purported to be a certain kind of way, but then their actual behavior was different, right? I think really what this question is about is the hypocrisy of some religious folks who claim to love and claim to accept, but then will deny whole swaths of the population salvation or grace or any of that. The reality is that human beings are really good at holding contrary ideas that make us able to live our lives. So if we, it may seem strange to like be a Unitarian, but then also be like really judgy, right? Like those theoretically don't really go together. But at the end of the day, humans are really good at telling themselves what they need to hear in order to live the way they want to live, right? So there are times when I will say that if we actually pushed our principles to their deepest point, right? If we really took seriously every single one of those principles that we currently have, we would probably be embracing a slightly more socialist society than we have. We might be doing different things with our money than we do. We might be living in different ways than we do. But we don't want to have to make those massive changes, right? We don't want to have to give away half of what we have. We don't want to have to live in a smaller house or whatever it is, right? And I count myself among that list of, it's not, I don't do all the things the principles call me to do at their fullest, most extreme interpretation. And I think it's just because we want also to be comfortable. And sometimes that means holding really disparate truths together at the same time. Not saying it's the right thing or the best way to live, but it is a unique thing for humans that we are capable of holding seemingly contrary things and living our lives anyway. There are a couple of questions relating to my hope and vision for USR. I like this one. My hope and vision for USR is that we continue to be a place that people feel safe, feel comfortable, feel able to be who they are, right? This is, I feel especially strongly about this for children and youth, right? That we continue to be a place where children and youth can come and really be themselves, right? And my hope is that we increasingly find ways to be bringing that outside of here, right? That it's not enough that we create this space as healing and safe and helpful and supportive, but that out there, we have to find a way to participate in creating more spaces like this. So whether that means partnering with local institutions or whether that means starting initiatives on our own, my hope would be that we begin to do more in our local community to expand the places that people feel the way they feel when they come here, if that makes sense. Okay. So this question, how do we embrace those who don't share our principles and hurt others? And this question references the first principle. So as you may or may not recall, the first principle is we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And in some ways it is the hardest of the principles, probably. It invariably with the youth, it raises the does that mean we have to embrace Hitler question, right? Or affirm the inherent worth and dignity of Hitler, right? It is the hardest. It's the hardest in the abstract sense of horrible criminals, and it's the hardest in the very real sense of that person who irritates you in a committee meeting, right? And I like to think of this as you are not called to embrace in the sense of support the views of and endorse and allow to spread the views of people who are hurting others, right? It's not like you have to be okay with oppression and prejudice and criminality, right? The point is, I think, and you can ponder this and let me know what you think. I think the point is not, it's the distinction between person and behavior, if I can start there, right? So when the kids do something wrong, we try very hard to say that thing you did was a bad choice, or that thing you did was naughty or whatever word, but not you are naughty and bad, right? So that's an important distinction. There are things that people do that are terrible, but we can look at the world and sort of go, okay, so that person who stole because our society is set up so they have nothing. And if they didn't, then their children would starve, right? And there's obviously gradients to all of this. There are levels. But I think the point is, underneath all of our behaviors and actions, at our foundation, we are humans, affected by the world, affected by the people who raised us, and possessed at our birth of possibility and promise and worth and dignity. And that worth and dignity doesn't disappear even as we behave in ways that perhaps are not the way we wish people would behave, right? So you are not called to sit and listen for 2 hours to someone spew hatred at you, but you are also not free to like kill that person, right? Like there's sort of you don't have to endorse it, but you also cannot become that person by then responding with hatred and anger and vitriol and, right? Does that make some sense? It's a great question. It's really hard. Honestly, we could probably do sermons about it for like a whole year and we would still be struggling. But it's a good one. This question is, when you hear the expression, what feeds your soul, how would you answer? I like this question too. For me, this question is tied into the question of spiritual practices for me too, right? So there is, the short answer is expressions of creativity, right? So for example, if you turn around and you look at the walls, I get to stand up here and I get to look at the art in the back of this room, and that it is a balm to my sight and to my soul, right? When I read poetry, when I like see my friend's sweater that they knitted and they're so proud of, right? And the reason it's tied to spiritual practice for me is because that is also where I find my own sense of spiritual sort of connection and fulfillment, is through acts of creativity. So at one point in my life that was knitting, at one point it was painting, at one point it was sculpting in clay, sometimes it's cooking, sometimes it's just telling a story to the kids, whatever it is, right? But the idea that I am participating in acts of creation for me is a deeply spiritual kind of experience, and getting to witness other people's acts of creation becomes a sort of spiritual food, if you will. Okay, there are definitely ones we're not going to get to. I'm looking at the clock, I promise. So this is a really practical one, but I'm going to answer it because I feel passionately about this. This question is, can you explain how best to connect to the work of the congregation if you're unclear about the circle structure? So, yes, see, I'm going to answer the circle structure question. The circle structure, if you don't know, our congregational work is organized in 6 areas of work. Each of those 6 areas has a facilitator and has a sort of descriptor about how they operate. If you are unclear about the circle structure, you can email me and I will tell you how to get connected. Honestly, that is the short answer. The short answer is that if you're unclear, you can come to me, you can come to Anne, you can go to the board, and then we will help you figure out how to get connected to the right area of work. And frankly, in general, I'm gonna expand this question. In general, if you're not sure about how something works, or if you're, confused, don't hold back. Like, get in touch with us. We're practicing question asking. Just ask, because that's what we're here to do. We're here to help you figure out how to get the most out of your congregational experience. And that means both participating in offering things to others. So however you want to be here and work here, just let us know and we'll help you figure it out. Don't be afraid to ask a question, right? Let's see. Okay, maybe we'll do this one as our last one. Are there any philosophical religious questions you used to ponder, but which you have given up asking yourself? And if yes, what are those questions and why? Sorry, I'm just making sure that the online ones, okay. Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes. There are definitely questions that as I have gotten older, I have stopped caring about the precise answer to. I would say probably one of those questions is the existence of God, honestly. I think that as a young person, the question of like, is there, isn't there, right? Like there's a lot of sort of stuff attached to it and some angst attached to it. And I think that at some point, the precise answer to that question didn't bother me anymore, or didn't seem particularly relevant anymore. And I don't know if that is because, you know, one of the particularly unique things about being a Unitarian Universalist minister is that I am deeply aware that sitting out there among the, you know, 60 or 70 of you, there are people with a personal relationship to Jesus. There are people who absolutely in their bones believe there is nothing beyond what is right here, right now. There are among you agnostics. There are among you folks who practice Buddhist meditation, right? Like I am aware that whatever answer I have to the question of something like, is there God? You all have completely unique and different answers to that as well. And I think that might actually be part of why the question doesn't particularly bother me anymore, is because I feel like there are so many ways to answer it, and I don't actually think any of them are wrong, right? So if none of those answers are wrong, then me having some particular answer no longer matters to me. And so instead of asking myself, you know, is there a God or isn't there, the question instead becomes, how are the people that I walk alongside and love and want to help, you know, sort of flourish spiritually in the world, how are they answering that question? How is that helping or hurting their lives, right, and their living? And that for me, ultimately, I've landed on a sort of like, and I've said it here before, I said it in early January, I gave you a little bit of a, here's what I think about God. But I've landed in a place of like, God as the thing that we can't always access or describe, and that for me looks like love, and the kind of love of the first principle that's, you know, hard to do, but we try our best to do. And it's beauty and it's creativity and it's creation and it's human meeting and it's human knowing. And that however we want to pinpoint that for each of us doesn't have to be the same, right? That is the central beauty of Unitarian Universalism, is that we don't have to have the same answer to any of these questions. But yeah, I think that's probably, I'm looking at Liz because she asked the question, but that's probably the one that I have most sort of given up any kind of angsting about over time. I'm just gonna double check the folks online because I don't want them to feel, okay. Okay, I will say there were a couple of questions about this, so I'm going to touch on it briefly, which is the principles and the new proposed. So I'm going to take the chance to touch on it, okay? I promise I'll be quick. We have 7 principles, 8 principles for those congregations like ours that affirmed the 8th principle, which relates to anti-racism and anti-oppression. There is a move now to replace those. There have been a couple newsletters. I'm looking at Jack because he wrote one, and I think I talked about this in a service earlier this year. So if you can help me, we'll recirculate those on Realm at least to remind folks. This June at GA, there'll be a vote about replacing the 7-8 principles with this new system that looks shockingly like our circle system, but it's 6 different words and it's some descriptors, and love is at the center. The question in various forms has been posed, how do I feel about it, and what do I think is going to happen? I honestly don't know what will happen at GA at the vote. I don't. Our delegates will go and they will vote their conscience and represent USR in that way. My personal feeling is that it is an opportunity to remind ourselves that nothing is stagnant, nothing is static. The principles were not meant to become idols. They were not meant to be fixed in stone. So while they are all I have ever known, they came into being like when I was a very, very small child, right? So my entire Unitarian Universalist experience has been with the 7 principles. It has been definitional. And still, I believe that part of the heart of Unitarian Universalism is the acceptance of change, and more than that, the active pursuit of growth. And so if we cling to the 7 principles because that's what's been and that's what we know, instead of opening ourselves to the idea that something else might be more productive, more fulsome, more deepening for all of us, then we're rejecting sort of the very heart of what the project of Unitarian Universalism is. There have been a lot of discussions about love at the center and like, is love too wishy-washy and what does that even mean and da-da-da. And it brings us back again to Anita's question about the first principle, which is it's not, the love that we're putting at the center. If English had more words for love, we would understand it better. But that love at the center is big, spiritual, holy kind of love, not romantic love, not even like the love you feel for your mom, right? It is like that thing that we sometimes glimpse that is bigger and more and beyond. So I have no problem with the new thing. I don't know what to call it. The new diagram and the new Article 2 stuff. I don't have an objection to it. My hope is that it does actually pass into the next phase, which is kind of like another sort of workshopping phase. It's not like all of a sudden everyone's got to scrub the 7 principles from their websites and like embrace this new thing wholeheartedly as is, right? It's passing it into another phase. And so personally, I hope it does. I hope it does pass through because I think it will be a clear sign that we're willing to continue to grow and move as a denomination, as opposed to being stuck in something that, while super wonderful and worked for a long time, maybe isn't what is called for now. Okay, I'm going to save these. And so I will answer you personally or in Realm or somewhere else if I did not get to your question here. We did one online last year, and now we've done one in person. This is the only 2 times we've done one, but I think we will try to do them again because I think it gives us an opportunity to talk together in a different kind of way. I really appreciate all of you who asked a question. It really is what makes it possible, so thank you.